Good evening, everyone. The latest projections of how many people we could lose to coronavirus are hard to fathom. 100 to 200,000, we've been told by the White House, and that, believe it or not, is best case. Yet tonight, in a country where some of you are watching us under virtual lockdown, inside somewhere, others are under few restrictions. More and more cities are preparing for the worst case. Field hospitals being erected in the nation's largest cities. A hospital ship pulling into port in New York. As the death toll in this state exceeds 1,000. Our team has a lot to cover. We begin with Miguel Almaguer.
As the coronavirus now threatens every state in our country, tonight this grim assessment from Dr. Anthony Fauci. The death toll could soar to 200,000, with millions of Americans infected if the nation does everything right. With New York already in crisis, where hospital ICUs are overloaded and the 911 system is stressed, cities like Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Atlanta, Dallas, and Nashville are bracing for an onslaught of cases. In Boston, at Brigham and Women's Hospital, more than 100 staff members have the virus.
I've never felt so close to death.
Heather Bauer, a Connecticut mother of 3, spent 9 days in the hospital after contracting the illness.
From the second you enter the ER, you're literally alone, and it's terrifying. I consider myself to be very, very healthy, and the way this took over my body was just a surreal experience. While field hospitals are being built inside the LA Convention Center and in Central Park, Oklahoma's governor now says anyone coming from hotspot states like New York or California must self-quarantine for 14 days. In Rhode Island, the National Guard and local police are going door to door, making sure anyone coming in from out of state recently stays isolated.
I feel very vulnerable. I definitely feel violated. I have a car with New York license plates in my driveway, and I'm fearful being in this state right now.
Also raising the alarm in Louisiana, the governor says the healthcare system is at the brink of being overwhelmed in just days. Michigan also in crisis. Morgan Radford is in hard-hit Detroit.
It's hospitals like these that are now bracing to battle these new hotspots. And they're not the only first responders taking a hit. The chief of police here in Detroit has tested positive for coronavirus, and more than 500 officers have been quarantined.
With the president extending guidelines for all Americans to keep their social distance for another 4 weeks, some states like Florida have not issued stay-at-home mandates.
We believe in laying hands on the sick, and they shall recover.
After 2 large Sunday services at the River Church in Tampa, the county sheriff issued an arrest warrant today for Pastor Rodney Howard Brown.
His reckless disregard for human life put hundreds of people in his congregation at risk.
Sam Brock is in Miami, where the city is under a curfew.
We got police officers out in full effect trying to educate people on staying inside of their homes. Checkpoints throughout the state of Florida at this hour, trying to prevent people from New York and the tri-state area from coming in without self-quarantining once they get here.
With more than 30 states issuing stay-at-home orders for all of its residents, the governor of Arizona today joined the national push to restrict crowds from gathering in public. But Doug Ducey still considers hair salons and golf clubs as exempt, calling them essential services.
I mean, there's no easier place to be physically distant away from someone than, out on a large golf course.
With the national death toll expected to rapidly escalate in the coming weeks, tonight officials warn no state and no community is immune from the virus.
While top doctors at the White House maintain it's going to get worse before it gets better, in states like Washington, where the number of new infections appears to be slowing, social distancing may be working. As a matter of fact, the president just said social distancing will save more than 1 million lives. In Leicester, it bears reminding the vast majority of Americans who catch the virus only have mild symptoms. Leicester.
Always important to point out. Miguel, thank you. And here in New York, the state's death toll rose above 1,000 today. The governor here now saying this is a war as much needed reinforcements arrived. Gabe Gutierrez has late details from the current U.S. epicenter.
The sight was monumental. The Statue of Liberty greeting the USNS Comfort as waiting crowds failed to social distance. The naval hospital ship docked in New York Harbor. to provide much-needed relief to those on the front lines.
Everyone describes all the critical care units as war zones because that's what it looks like.
The race to fight the coronavirus in and around New York City, the U.S. epicenter, reached new heights today as charity workers rushed to build an emergency field hospital in iconic Central Park.
This is one of the more improbable things we've done.
There are crucial ventilators here, as well as 68 hospital beds, a small fraction of the amount authorities say will be necessary throughout the city. Meanwhile, President Trump suggested that authorities are asking for too many protective masks.
Something's going on, and you ought to look into it as reporters. Where are the masks going? Are they going out the back door?
Today, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo responded.
If he wants to make an accusation, then let him make an accusation. But I don't know what he's trying to say by inference.
The long hours and high risk are taking a toll.
I'm used to hugging her, holding her hand when we walk down the street, picking up my son.
For Alex Fortenko, an ER doctor in Manhattan, his shift at work is not the only thing that's painful. He's moved into an Airbnb to protect his family.
I started crying because we were talking about how hard of a day he'd had. And my instinct was to go in and give him a hug and comfort him and want to be comforted, and you can't do that.
8 residents at this New Jersey nursing home have died.
He didn't deserve this. I mean, nobody does. Nobody.
Ramon Osoria was 63 years old. His children say he died last week from COVID-19 at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens.
Do you think that if they had had more supplies that your father might be alive?
Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
For so many families, behind the growing numbers are goodbyes that never happened. In New York City, this funeral home is overwhelmed. And tonight, Robert Lugar is suffering through the loneliest grief imaginable.
My grandmother died alone. She died alone. We didn't even get to say bye to her. And I understand that's part of the death process. But she was there. She was in the hospital. She was feet away. We couldn't even see her. We couldn't talk to her.
Today, we also learned that New York City lost its first child to the virus. Authorities wouldn't release his or her age, but did say the child had an underlying health condition, like the vast majority of those who die from COVID-19. Governor Cuomo also pleaded for healthcare workers from across the country to come help. Lester.
And we are grateful for each and every one of them. All right, Gabe, thank you. Also breaking, Ford joining GM in the race to produce enough ventilators, while President Trump has now reversed himself and extended social distancing guidelines until the end of April. Our Jeff Bennett is at the White House.
Tonight, just days after President Trump ordered General Motors to make ventilators under the Defense Production Act, Ford Motor announcing it's teaming up with GE Healthcare to produce 50,000 ventilators within the next 100 days, transforming a factory in Michigan to help meet the demand of hospitals around the country. But as coronavirus cases in the U.S. continue to climb, President Trump, during a conference call with governors today, downplayed the problems posed by a persistent lack of coronavirus test kits, 2 sources familiar tell NBC News. In response to requests for more testing kits, the president responded by saying he hasn't heard about testing in weeks. It all comes a day after the president accepted the advice from his top medical experts to extend the nation's social distancing guidelines through the end of April. Dr. Anthony Fauci says he and Dr. Deborah Birx presented the president with alarming new projections that millions of Americans may contract the virus.
We showed him the data. He looked at the data, and he got it right away. It was a pretty clear picture. We argued strongly with the president that he not withdraw those guidelines after 15 days, but that he extend them. And he did listen.
It's a stark shift for the president, who last week complained about the economic pain caused by tight restrictions meant to slow the spread, tweeting, "We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself," and pushed to reopen the country within weeks.
I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
The president now says Easter is when the government expects coronavirus deaths in the U.S. to peak. And President Trump is now eyeing another new date on the calendar. June 1st is when he predicts the country will be on its way to recovery. Lester?
Jeff Bennett at the White House, thank you. In just 2 days now from the start of a new month, that means for a lot of folks, bills are due, but paying them is going to be tough for millions of Americans now out of work, including those at Macy's, just announced today. Here's Tom Costello.
Tonight, a crushing blow for an American icon already struggling in the dot-com era. With all stores closed and few sales, Macy's says it's furloughing most of its 130,000 employees. The pandemic hitting companies big and small. Michael Levy owns a printing press franchise on Long Island with 3 employees. Sales are down 95% and the bills are coming due.
It's really scary because my rent is due this week. I have payroll this week. And all my leases on my equipment are also due.
To help keep companies afloat and Americans employed, the Paycheck Protection Program enables small business owners to apply for a loan that could be entirely forgiven if the money is used for expenses like employee payroll and monthly payments. If a company can prove it kept 100% of its workforce by doing that, the entire loan would be forgiven. If there are some layoffs, the amount forgiven would be determined by how much of the workforce is kept on. But in Lynchburg, Virginia, Mallory Hill is urgently seeking unemployment benefits and Medicaid after being laid off last week as a contracted school counselor.
I own a house. I'm a single mom. And so my fear is I'm the only income. And how am I going to provide for my child?
If you're in trouble, money experts say now is the time to preserve cash, make the minimum payments on credit cards, ask creditors for leniency, including medical and dental bills if necessary, and focus on paying the bills you must.
So we need to keep food on the table. We need to keep the lights on and the heat in the house. We need to pay for health care because health care has never been more important.
For renters, many cities and states are prohibiting evictions, and homeowners with federally backed loans are protected from foreclosure for now. Daniel Kramer is facing mounting bills after being forced to lay off almost all of his 175 employees at 4 Washington, D.C. restaurants. Tonight, he's defiant.
We don't have a backup plan, and our goal is to rehire every single employee, and that's what we're going to do.
Never before have Americans been thrown out of work so quickly and in such great numbers, with no indication when they'll be able to return.